Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. It's a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity. My name is Jim Hartnett. I'm the Executive Director of the Caltrain Commuter Rail System and the CEO of the San Mateo County Transit District, as well as of the San Mateo County Transportation Association. When voters approved Prop 1A in 2008, it wasn't just about connecting the state with high-speed rail. It was about making investments in local systems to connect the systems, improve the systems to support a statewide rail network. And large-scale visionary projects such as high-speed rail are examples of projects that should and must be planned in a way that prioritize investments in local improvements while also making incremental but significant progress toward the long-term vision. And that's what the investment in the bookends accomplishes, particularly from our perspective for the northern bookend. In addition to my current positions, I served for 4 years as a member of the board of the High Speed Rail Authority and previously served as mayor of Redwood City. So I have some direct connection to the history of high-speed rail in our region in the Bay Area, you know, it's been a very interesting history. During the time that I was on the board of High Speed Rail Authority, there was a transformation of the approach on the board, and it was in part prodded by a community, in part based upon an extensive reevaluation by the High Speed Rail Authority itself in terms of what made sense. It was in collaboration with the legislature, and it was a recognition at the time of this transformation of what really made sense, not just for us on the peninsula, but statewide for high-speed rail and the connectivity to the broader statewide rail system. And so, as you know, the product of efforts by many, including many in this room, was SB 1029, which appropriated for the high-speed rail monies for construction, not only in the Central Valley, but directed over $1 billion of investment in local and regional improvements in the bookends in Southern California and in Northern California. And in our case, that state funding is being used, as you know, to leverage over $1 billion. I emphasize leveraging over $1 billion in other monies to upgrade our Caltrain corridor and allow us to deliver more service at a time when our communities really, really need it most. We're happy that the draft business plan reaffirms the state's commitment to advancing and investing in these local improvements. For us, we're struggling to accommodate unprecedented regional growth. 2015 brought us our 5th consecutive year of record-setting ridership. As those of you who have been to our area and driven on Highway 101 between San Francisco and San Jose, or taken the beautiful 280, you find that it takes a lot longer to get where you'd like to go. And it's because of the economic dynamism and dramatic growth of our region that we have congestion that people never would have dreamed of before. And we are in a circumstance in which the demands on our rail system are incredible. At peak hours, we are already at 100% capacity, and the demand continues. The electrification is extremely important to the entire region, not just because it will potentially allow us to double the capacity of our rail system, but it will allow us to affect the congestion on the roadways as well. You know, we're in a region that is pretty extraordinary in a state that's very extraordinary. But our region, our 51-mile railroad goes through a region that is responsible for about 14% of the state's GDP. About 20% of California tax revenue comes from our region. And we're the birthplace of over half of the patents that arise from folks who are in California. We're in a very extraordinary area in which we are served by a more than 150-year-old commuter rail service that needs to be modernized, not just to keep up with where we are now, but to take care of our future ridership demand. Fortunately, with the state's help, Caltrain has been able to advance our modernization program, our electrification program. And the centerpiece of that is to transform us from a diesel fleet to a clean electric fleet. We'll be able to deliver service that is cleaner, faster, and more frequent to those folks who live and work and come through the peninsula. When we are finished, ultimately with electrification, we will have almost doubled our capacity. We will have reduced vehicle miles driven by hundreds of thousands of miles every day. The system's greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced ultimately by almost 97%, eliminating hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2. Not to mention the jobs that are created by not only the construction but the increased ability to serve people. You know, right now we're on a pace to provide 19 million rides per year in our old system that is just strained to the nth degree. But that 19 million rides per year equates to about 380 million road miles not driven per year. 380 million road miles not driven per year based upon our current ability to serve people. We have a diesel fleet that is reaching the end of its useful life. We have to electrify just to keep up with our current service and to keep up with the demand that we know is there, because people every day are saying, we need you to stop here, we need you to stop there. We can't get on the train anymore. So we have, in our history of working with high-speed rail, we've worked together with others, and in 2012, there was the MOU between 9 parties in our region that put together the funding plan to complete these improvements. We have more work to do, but we are very pleased that in addition to the other monies that we've talked about that we bring to the table, the federal government really believes in our electrification, our modernization project. The FTA has allocated about $73 million of funds from prior fiscal years that do not require congressional action for our electrification project that we use towards matching state funds. And the President has put a $125 million line item in his proposed 2017 budget, and we know we have tremendous support for that. But meanwhile, as we continue to collaborate with the High-Speed Rail Authority as it prepares to go through the environmental process on the peninsula for additional improvements that will be needed to equip the corridor to accommodate high-speed rail service in what we call the blended system, we are still engaged in the planning and design together with high-speed rail. And as that is done, it's certainly important that as we work together, the impacts on our surrounding neighborhoods have to be minimized, and the benefits that have been promised need to be realized. We know that if done right, our 150-year-old rail corridor will be transformed, connecting the nation's most innovative communities to each other and to the rest of the state. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Hartnett. I took note of your claim to half of the patents in the state of California. I think Mr. Turner could probably claim another half. And that leaves the rest of the state with a third half. I'm not sure how that math works.
We're a great state.
We are indeed. Well, Mr. Morales, you've heard presentations about upgrades and enhancements that are desired both at both of the bookends to the project. For example, I heard Councilmember G very clearly talking about the number of grade separations that would benefit the Caltrain line, and I think there's only, if I'm reading my notes correctly here, there's only 3 currently in the planning and in the budget. So if you could, I'll kick off the questions here by asking, how do you move forward on these issues, and what is the timeline for resolving them?
Sure. 2 things about grade crossings I think it's important to keep in mind. One, there's the safety issue of grade crossings. Where you have at-grade crossings, there are safety issues, and that's true wherever they are. The second is the issue that Councilman Member G was speaking to, which was more than the traffic impacts of the result of having gates down. And I do want to point out first that on the peninsula, because we will be using the existing corridor, so all of those grade crossings exist today and have for the better part of 150 years. We are working on that, but what our plan
You're
calls
going to be
for,
adding, the project's going to be adding capacity.
we will be adding,
the concern
the
is
combination,
that the
yes.
east-west traffic is going to back up even
Correct.
further.
But both Caltrain capacity will be increasing, as well as the addition of high-speed rail in the corridor. But I just do want to point out first, from a safety perspective, our plan calls for significant safety upgrades to those corridors, full fencing of the corridor, quad gates, which are the state-of-the-art facilities. So the safety issue will be addressed to statistically about 99+%. So that's a very important element. On the broader question of grade separations, I think that is really a discussion that we need to and are engaging in with the region to look at how to fund those grade separation projects beyond those that are strictly needed in order for us to do our operations. Grade separation projects, particularly on the peninsula, can be very complicated because you talk about impacting adjacent. You have things built up right up to the rail line, so they're not simple projects by any means. They can be very expensive. And so one of the things that we are working on with the region, with Caltrain, is developing a regional strategy for how to move those forward beyond those that are necessary for us to operate. The other thing I would just point out is elsewhere in the state where we are building new dedicated infrastructure, so for instance through the Central Valley, we'll be eliminating 55 existing grade separations. Some of those right in downtown Fresno that have the same types of impacts on traffic and other things that will now be removed from there, and we're working on others in Southern California as well.
Let me respectfully, if I can, interrupt you. I didn't mean to, although I'm sure Councilmember G is happy about it, I didn't mean to focus you in solely on the issue of grade separations. I'm more interested in the big picture of the various issues and improvements that are of concern or interest to the communities on the 2 bookend sides of the project. So I'm interested in your responding to what the process will be and what length of time it will take to discuss and resolve as many of those issues as possible.
The near-term process so I'll talk first on the peninsula. We are, in fact, we have initiated an environmental process to look at those improvements that we will need to make to the corridor above and beyond the electrification project. That process is underway now and involves extensive community engagement to look at what impacts there are, including traffic impacts, and what would trigger then the need for new grade separations, then develop the strategy for how to fund those. I think that some of the issues that Mr. G is talking about probably go beyond, strictly speaking, what would come out of our environmental process and go to the functioning of the cities there, even under existing conditions. So our environmental process is underway. We're scheduled to complete at the end of 2017, so we would have by then would have a sense of what we would need to do on that corridor in order to operate in conjunction with the communities. I think the other process is the broader regional discussion, which is getting underway now.
All right, thank you. And Southern California?
And Southern California, we have the MOU in place. Well, similarly, we're going through the environmental processes there on the section. What we've been talking about between Burbank and L.A. and then on to Anaheim, we also have the environmental reviews with all the same community engagement there. There we have a significant number of already identified projects that in many cases there is already regional money committed to them, in part, not to fully fund them. But they've recognized the priority of those. We're working with the agencies now to develop the strategy, and you'll see it in the final business plan, a clearer description of what that process will be for determining how we can jointly with the region move those projects together and get them going as soon as possible. The Rosecrans Marquardt one we spoke of, again, is in environmental reviews led by Metro. The plan then is to move that into construction as quickly as possible, hopefully this year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions and then a couple of comments. First, Mr. Morales, this business plan, the 2016 draft plan, shows decrease in costs, construction costs, for both the San Francisco to San Jose segment and the San Jose to Merced segment. Can you give me greater detail of how we're able to project those decreases in costs?
Sure. Overall, we show about a $5.5 billion reduction of cost, just going relative to the 2014 plan, and that's a combination of three major factors. One is the first is a combination of value engineering, also better information about alignments and just advancing the project another 2 years. The second element are the lessons learned from the first bids, actually taking specific examples of things that the bidders proposed, different ways of doing things that can be applied elsewhere in the system. A specific example is our plans called for elevated structures in many locations. What the bidders came in with were places where they said rather than doing an elevated structure, which costs more to build up, was to put embankment in and reduce costs. So we've now looked at where we can apply that same principle elsewhere in the system, and that is part of the cost reduction. And then the third is because of, and it's the smallest piece, but because of the 2 years of advancement, we've addressed some of the contingency issues, the unknowns, and so we actually do reduce the contingency slightly, just because we've eliminated some of the uncertainties along the way.
Can I just supplement, though, to say that the contingency is still very significant? I mean, it's
about 11 in the Phase 1 system. All told, there's $11 billion of contingency built into the number.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Richard, help me understand. Are we currently in contract to construct south to Shafter?
We're currently, we've Mr. Morales just executed what we call construction package 4, and basically that goes to that area just south of Shafter. So when we say currently in construction, we're currently in construction starting up in the Fresno and Madera area. We have executed the contract that will commence construction soon for, I think it's 22 miles or something like that, in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley.
Okay. And the ridership projections on the operating segment north from the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley, how confident are you of those based on the fact that we're not connecting into Bakersfield?
Right. So let me say a general comment about our ridership projections, and then specifically in that area. Well, I'll start with specifically in that area, which was your question. I don't think there's any question that as it exists right now in our draft business plan, the real ridership is going to be coming basically from Fresno to the Silicon Valley. There's not that much of an increment south of Fresno. This is a good time to maybe explain why all this comes together this way, because as I was saying before, the average citizen applying common sense would look at this and have a number of questions. We operate with a fair number of constraints, not only in the Prop 1A, but also the need to spend the federal money that we have by the deadline of 2017. Any monies from the $3.3 billion, well, it's actually from about $2.5 billion of the federal money that isn't spent by that time gets left on the table. So in the past, it was determined that the first segment would be in the Central Valley. That was the basis for the contract with the federal government. And so ultimately, of course, the tracks will run all the way through there. And we had started down that road. And then when we looked at, well, what can we do to get a system up and running fast enough, we basically said if we keep marching south from where we're going, we could end up short on the other end and not be able to get to San Jose. That would not be a usable segment. So this portion, it's really kind of a tail track south of Hanford, but it does have an important function in helping us test the trains because it's a long increment, allows us to test the trains. In terms of ridership, what I do want to say is that we have a high degree of confidence in our ridership projections. There have been two different peer review groups that have looked at our overall ridership projections. The peer review group represented by Mr. Thompson, who's testified before this committee, and a separate, and I don't want to ascribe to him a specific endorsement of the numbers, but he testified last time that our methodologies are state of the art, albeit with a lot of uncertainties. There was a separate peer review group that was just focused on ridership projections, and then there was an audit of all that by the Federal Governmental Accountability Office that basically said that they looked at our methodologies for cost and revenue projections and found them to be sound and reasonable. Despite all that, Mr. Rossi, my colleague, the former banker, more or less has arbitrarily reduced some of the ridership estimates, basically by about a quarter from prior plans, just so we can have a high degree of confidence that even at those lower estimates we can still achieve the crossing the bar of operating without a subsidy.
Right, thank you. Mr. Chair, two comments then, and I'm done. First comment does have to do with the Central Valley to San Jose segment, and I don't want to disparage the people or the almonds in Shafter, but I would hope that we don't invest a lot of money in a station there, since it's not a permanent spot, and if we're moving in that direction, I just think we've got to connect to Bakersfield and we've got to connect to Merced in that segment, and we've got to do that as soon as possible. I just think it doesn't make sense otherwise. So I would hope that as you look at the business plan in this draft form, that some consideration be given to how do we expedite the construction all the way down to Bakersfield and then up the link up to Merced. The second comment is that I think that there's merit for the legislature and the administration and the authority to give consideration to how do we move forward with some additional investments early in the bookends. I'm concerned, obviously, in the region I represent with both safety, traffic flow, and full acceptance of the electrified Caltrain that can occur with some community investments in grade separations. In Southern California, I'm concerned about the constraints that freight traffic currently provides and whether there are ways to address that, as well as additional grade separations in a region that where not only are we trying to move people, but we've got an awful lot of freight movement out of the port at Los Angeles and Long Beach that needs to be addressed. So I'm hopeful that we could give some consideration as a way to look at additional investments in the bookends as part of our deliberations this year.
Mr. Chairman, might I just have 15 seconds to make one
15
comment?
seconds, please.
I just wanted to say on your first point, Assembly Member, we are already looking hard at that question of the temporary station in Shafter. Both we agree with the LAO that is worth another look, and we've also been talking with people in Bakersfield about the best way to go forward. So we're taking that very seriously, as is the question of connecting to Merced. And I've been working directly with Assemblymember Gray, Senator Galgiani, and I've also heard from, as you would imagine, from Congressman Costa on that question. We are giving a lot of thought and effort to that, and you may see movement in the final plan.
Mr. Patterson, then Mr. Obernolte.
For the purpose of time and don't need to go back over old territory. But just briefly with respect to the LAO's analysis. Members, this is a very serious analysis. It is clear and in-depth and shows significant holes in the plan. And I really think we have to understand that, embrace it, and deal with it. So I'm not going to go over all of the concerns that were raised. But I think I heard two things here. One, you're $3 billion short of the initial segment. $2.9 billion?
Actually,
I thought I heard you testify to that.
Let me just be clear, Assembly Member. If we do not get that money, we can build a segment that operates without a subsidy and comports with the Bond Act. If we get that money, we have a better and more sensible segment. But the $3 billion is not necessary in order to have a useful segment under the definition of the Bond Act and useful for other purposes. It makes more sense to connect into Bakersfield and upgrade into San Francisco. But if we don't get that money, we will build something that comports with the Bond Act, delivers passengers without a subsidy.
Do you have a response?
I think the $2.9 billion that you're referencing is to extend the initial operating segment into Bakersfield, as well as certain upgrades to allow high-speed trains to get up the peninsula partway into San Francisco, not the full scope of San Jose to San Francisco.
Did I also hear that the terminus in Shafter could be there a decade or more? I understood that you had to get, if you got additional money, it would be through federal sources and it would be over a long period of time.
Federal sources are the first source that we're going to seek. If that doesn't happen, we'll be looking for other sources to make that connection because it makes sense. I think that going to the question that Assemblymember Gordon asked, and also the issue that was raised by the LAO, our current draft business plan contemplated, because that was Shafter was the end of the construction, that we would put a temporary station there. We've heard a lot of commentary from people questioning whether that makes sense or whether the last station should be in Hanford, which is or Wasco, which are our current stations. So we're looking at that question. If there were a temporary station, it would be there until we extended down into Bakersfield. We have people questioning whether the temporary station makes sense, and we're reevaluating that issue.
Did I misunderstand that the that the time frame with respect to finding additional money could stretch a decade or more to get to Bakersfield.
Well, that is correct, Assembly Member, in the sense that we're saying that this will open in 2025, which is 9 years from now, and we would like to be able to open to Bakersfield in that same time frame.
Second point, wasn't the decision to make the turn going south to going north a tacit admission you just couldn't build going south?